And finally, new rule, Republicans have to be honest about who these days is more deranged. They love to invoke Trump derangement syndrome, and there is some of that, but Trump really is doing things when it comes to ignoring court orders and using the Justice Department for partisan goals and deploying the military domestically that no one ever came close to doing before, so I don't feel especially deranged calling that out.
During the latest episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, Maher focused his new rule monologue on calling out Trump-aligned Republican figures like Mike Johnson and former Trump press secretary Karoline Leavitt for their hypocrisy, criticizing so-called extremism on the left while continuing to empower extremists on their own side. It's a double standard that I've talked about many times before, and I really appreciate that Maher, who often has fans on the right, is using his platform to make it clear. Democrats simply aren't doing what Republicans are doing. And calling that out isn't TDS, it's just honesty. Before we break this down further, if you enjoy this kind of political analysis and want to support the channel, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Now, Maher is a bit of a mixed bag for me. I often disagree with him on culture war topics because he sometimes gives too much ground to right-wing framing. But one thing I've always respected is his willingness to call out Donald Trump and today's Republican Party while rejecting false equivalents. He consistently reminds viewers that Democrats and Republicans are not the same. Not in behavior, not in rhetoric, and not in extremism. And that's something rare among self-described centrists. So let's check out a few clips from this latest segment where Maher really drives that point home.
But having your press secretary say that the Democratic Party's main constituency is made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals, that's deranged.
It really is unbelievable. As many of you will remember, we've covered this story before. Donald Trump's official spokesperson, Karoline Leavitt, has made some truly shocking statements. This is the person who speaks directly for Trump and represents his administration publicly, arguably the second most visible figure after Trump himself. Now, think back about 10 years ago when Republicans were furious over Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables comment. That was said at a private event, and she wasn't even a government official at the time. She was a candidate speaking candidly, and even then, she clarified that she was being reductive and wasn't talking about all Trump supporters. Still, the right has been talking about that quote for a decade. Fast forward to now, and you have the official spokesperson for Donald Trump saying far worse things, calling Democratic voters things like terrorist sympathizers or violent criminals. That kind of rhetoric is extreme and irresponsible. Imagine if a Democratic press secretary like Jen Psaki or Karine Jean-Pierre ever said something remotely similar. It would dominate the headlines for weeks. One thing that stands out here is how the media tends to rush from one Trump controversy to the next, making it difficult for each one to get the sustained attention it deserves. But this particular controversy hasn't gone away. In fact, it seems to have led to some increasingly defensive behavior from Leavitt herself, especially as she's been called out by Democratic leaders like Hakeem Jeffries. And frankly, if you can dish out harsh rhetoric, you should be prepared to take criticism in return. That's just basic accountability. So I have to give Bill Maher credit here. While I often disagree with his takes on culture war topics, I really appreciate that he's been willing to call out this kind of behavior clearly and directly. He's not letting it slide, and that's important. Now let's move to another segment from that Real Time with Bill Maher New Rule monologue. The full clip runs about 7.5 minutes, but here's a shorter highlight that really captures the point he was making.
Are there dumb, college-age, useful idiots who march for Hamas? Yes, that exists, as does Democrats who stupidly enabled way too many migrants to enter the country. But that is a far cry from the main constituency of the party being terrorists or being illegal aliens. And violent criminals? Well, 7 million people came out last weekend for the big protest, and there was no violence. But there was a lot on January 6th.
Exactly. And that brings us to an important reminder about the No Kings protests. These demonstrations were massive. Between roughly 2,600 and 3,000 events across the country, drawing an estimated 7 million participants nationwide. That's about 2 million more than the earlier June 14th No Kings actions. And here's the key point. Those protests were overwhelmingly peaceful. Even Speaker Mike Johnson, who clearly wasn't a supporter, had to admit that. He sarcastically said something like, well, congratulations, I guess, not burning anything down or hurting anyone. But the fact is, those demonstrations were peaceful, despite many on the right predicting chaos or violence. They were proven completely wrong. Now contrast that with January 6th, a much smaller, more contained event, but one that turned violent and became an attempt to overturn a lawful election. It was undeniably an attack on democracy, a violent effort to keep Donald Trump in power after he lost. That's the difference. One side held peaceful demonstrations affirming democracy, the other carried out a violent assault against it. And here's what's truly troubling. Many Republican leaders feel perfectly comfortable demonizing the phrase "no kings," even though that idea is at the core of what America stands for. The United States was literally founded on rejecting monarchy. If you believe any president, Republican or Democrat, should hold unchecked, king-like power, that's not patriotic, that's the opposite. True patriotism is about defending democracy and opposing authoritarianism in all forms. So yes, if someone wants to live under a monarch, there are places in the world where that still exists. But here in America, we don't do kings. We don't do strongmen. And we certainly don't do self-proclaimed rulers who think they're above the law. That's why it's so important to keep speaking out, peacefully, passionately, and patriotically. Democracy only survives when people stand up to protect it. Now, let's go to one final clip.
So yes, each side has its crazies, and I'll grant you, at least the right has found a place for theirs. Unfortunately, that place is elected government. It should not be the case that the White House press spokesperson sounds exactly like the worst Karen at Dollar General.
Exactly. That's the difference, and that's the one I wanted to close on, right? So we talk about this all the time. This has been a bugbear of mine and a theme of mine ever since I entered, public F-facing political commentary when people say, well, the left has its extremists. The Democrats have their outliers. That's true. No mass social or political movement comprised of tens of millions of people, which is what political parties are going to be bereft of crazy people or outliers or extremists. It's inevitable. The only question there are a couple of questions. How many as a percentage and raw number? How many extremists and outliers do you have in this movement? And to what extent are their views reflected in the leadership, the thought, the spiritual, the political leadership of the movement? And do the spiritual thought and political leaders of a movement condemn the outliers? Well, we see that on the Democratic side. There is no Democratic equivalent to Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene or M. Gates or, Ted Cruz or who, there's just not like that. There is no, Tim Burchett or Randy Fine in the Democratic Party's crazies do not wield power. And to the extent you want to get super liberal, pun intended. And call AOC a crazy. She's not. And she certainly has never said anything approaching the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene has said about the Democratic Party. The AOC has never said anything like that or advocated anything like that for the Republican Party. Marjorie Taylor Greene has openly called the Democratic Party an evil, violent party of groomers and pedophiles. She said that publicly. AOC has never said such things about the Republican Party despite their many faults. So Bill Maher is right. The difference is, one of the biggest differences, the Republican Party takes their crazies and promotes them, elevates them, gives them state and political power. Like even the tech scandal that we saw about, the young Republicans, the members of the young Republicans, talking about how much they love Hitler and all these things. Those were Republican leaders. And some of them were not just Republican leaders, but they actually worked and wielded power in state, local, and federal government. You just don't see comparable things, and certainly not in the same numbers on the Democratic side. And I'm sorry, this is a meaningful distinction. This is why the Democratic Party on its worst day, and it has many bad days, is better for this country than the Republican Party on its very best. So I appreciate Bill Maher pointing that out again, debunking the false equivalence. I'm sure many of his right-wing friends or frenemies or acquaintances will not be happy to hear what he had to say, but what he said here was pretty much 100% spot on. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.